Hey everyone. So in this video, I'm actually going to show you how to create a full stack application that can talk to large language models like OpenAI. What I mean by full stack is that I'm going to show you how to create a React front end that has a little interface that can actually query a relational database using natural language. And then it's also going to talk to a server that we're going to write that's going to be using Node.js, and that in turn is going to be using OpenAI APIs. We're also going to be using something called LangChain. And if you're not familiar with what LangChain is, simply that is just a framework that allows us to easily integrate with large language models and not be tied into any single one. So if you want to use an open source version, you can easily swap out OpenAI for an open source version. We're going to show you how to build all that from scratch. So if you're interested in how to do this, great little project to have in your portfolio, please stick around. Let's get started. What we're going to be building is a little application that is going to be able to talk to a SQL database using normal, just regular language, English language or natural language, if you will. So we're using natural language to talk to the database. So someone can ask it a question, and behind the scenes, what's going to happen is it's going to translate that into SQL and then send that request to the database to have the query executed and then the results returned. So the database we'll be using SQLite, and we'll be talking to a database called Chinook, which is related. It's based on media data that was created from an iTunes library. So it has a schema that you can kind of see here, and I'm going to provide the links for all of this so you can go back to this site as well. And I'll be providing the source code for everything as well, so you can have access to everything. But we're going to be walking through this from scratch from beginning to end. So we'll show you how to build this. But essentially, this is the database we'll be talking to. And behind the scenes, we'll be generating the query. We'll be using the large language model itself to be able to execute queries and determine what the query should be based on the schema. So we're going to send the schema to ChatGPT or OpenAI, if you will, and have it determine what should be the query for that, and then execute that query based on our question. As I mentioned, I'll be providing the source code for all of this, and you can kind of see here the technology that we'll be using. So we'll be using React on the front end, we'll be using Node.js and Express on the back end. The database will be a SQLite database using the Chinook sample database that I just showed you, and we'll be leveraging OpenAI and LangChain to be able to make the large language model queries. As far as prerequisites that you should have, the assumption is you already have Node.js installed on your workstation, and you also have NPM installed. You'll have an OpenAI API key that you will need to make the queries, and I will show you that when we get to it, how to set that up. And just to show you what the application is going to look like, it's going to have a simple screen here where the user can enter in a question such as, how many songs in the database, and hit generate answer, and it should return back the number of songs. So behind the scenes, it translated that into an actual SQL statement and queried that database accordingly. So that's what it's going to do. And you can use it to ask other types of questions, such as give me the names of 10 customers. And it should run that query, and you can see the results there of that query. So that's how it's going to work. And so stick around if you want to learn how to do this. All right, so to get started, you're going to bring up your favorite editor. I happen to use VS Code, so that's what I'm using today, but you can use whatever editor you prefer. And we're going to start off with an empty folder. And I created my folder called Demo SQL Chat, and there's nothing in here right now. So we're going to create two projects. There's going to be a server project and a client project. So right now, we'll just kind of make the directory for the server, and we'll see that pop up here, and we'll come back and fill that in as we move to that side. We're going to start off with working on just a front end React app with our interface the way I showed you earlier. All right, so in order to create the front end, we're going to first off make sure we have Node installed. So we'll check our Node version. and we should have 18. So I have 18, 19. That's a good version. If you have an earlier version, you're going to probably want to upgrade just because there are some things that change from time to time. So just make sure you're on a later version to make sure there aren't any issues as you go through this. All right. The next thing we're going to do here is we're going to use a tool to go ahead and install and create the front end for us. And that's going to be npm create vit at latest. All right, and it's going to walk you through there. We're going to change the name to client, so it creates a client folder for us. And we're going to come down here and pick React, and we're going to make sure we pick JavaScript. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to cd into that client folder, and you can kind of see that up here as well, that we have that all filled out. And we're going to do an npm install and let that roll. And then once that's done, we're going to do an npm run dev, and that should give us, that should start server up. We can go ahead and copy this to the clipboard, bring it up your favorite browser, paste it in there, and you should see your React client ready to roll. So now we have to just change the interface to match what we want to see in our application. All right, so now that we have our React app project ready to go, we're now going to start customizing it to have it have the appearance that we need. So I'm in my client folder here, and you're going to drive into the source folder, and we're going to make a few changes. We're going to get rid of the CSS that's here. So I'm going to delete that CSS file, and we're actually going to get our own from another location, and I'll show you that in a second. So let me go ahead and delete this one as well. And we're going to go ahead into our main application, or the main app here, and we're just going to get rid of all, this is all of the boilerplate that you saw when we ran this. So we're going to get rid of all this for right now. So let's just go ahead and get rid of everything from here on down. And we're just going to type in h1 chat my database just to see something show up. And then we're also going to get rid of this CSS here. We'll come back and add some additional in a second. And then I think we're also in the main.js, we're going to get rid of this CSS file. Okay. So if we go back and look at our application, it's pretty much just ready to, kind of a clean slate. We're just ready to start customizing it. So in order to make things go a little smoother and not have to deal with all of the styling, I have created some CSS. Actually, I got it from one of the OpenAI tutorials. Unfortunately, they changed it recently, so I actually just forked it over to my shareable resources repo. You can access it from here. But essentially, this will save us a ton of time trying to get everything to look pretty. I don't want to spend a lot of energy on that. So I'll provide this link as well, but under shareable resources, you're going to grab the index module.css, grab the raw text here, copy that to the clipboard, and then head back over to your client project, and we're going to go into the source folder, and we're going to add a new file called index.module.css. And let's go ahead and paste all that in. All right. And then once we have that, so this will be all the styling. This will give us kind of a nice look and feel for the application. So definitely don't want to spend a lot of time doing that. It's not a fun job. I know some people love that stuff, but I'm definitely not into the whole CSS thing. All right. So back in my app.jsx file here, again, this is going to be the main React component that we're going to be updating. We're going to go ahead and add in support for that new style sheet. And then we're also going to get rid of a few things that we're not using right now. I'm just going to get rid of these. Actually, I'm going to get rid of all of these here. We don't need any of that. All right, but we are going to import styles from that new file we just created, index module.css. Okay, and we're going to go up here and we're going to create a main element, and then we're going to grab the h1 and paste that in here. All right, and then we're going to put those styles in there. So we're going to use class name, and again, I'm assuming at this point that you have a little bit of comfort with React. I'll try to explain a little bit of what's going on, but in a nutshell, JSX files are JavaScript that allow us to also kind of have embedded JavaScript within some things that look like HTML, but it's really JavaScript. And then behind the scenes, there's a lot of magic happening to bring this together. But you're going to see both some JavaScript code as well as returning a set of JavaScript code with HTML at the same time. And it's kind of brought together into a single construct, if you will, and that's kind of the power of what React gets us. So you'll see me do some of this. So some things you may be used to, like class names and the casing of things, is specific to what React needs to have. But what we're going to do here is we're going to put in a variable so that the class name gets replaced with our style. So we're going to get rid of this, and we're going to use styles.main. Okay, and once we have that, let's head back over to our application and kind of centered here. All right, so it's working correctly. So if you see it centered correctly, then you've got everything working correctly. All the styles are correctly defined. Okay. All right, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to create we're going to use an icon here as well. So we are going to come up to another site called Flat Icons, and you can use, there's all kinds of other sites, but Flat Icons is very nice for just grabbing some images. And we're going to search for SQL, since we want to have like a nice little image. And let's go ahead and do a SQL query. I'm just going to pick this one, and we go ahead and download this one. Just go download the PNG, free download. All right, so there it is, database.png. We're then going to take that, and I'm going to go over to my downloads, and I'm going to grab that and go into my application here under assets and drop that in there. So we have our database PNG in there. All right, and that'll be our icon we're going to put up there. So let's go ahead and put that on the page. So we're going to go back to our app.jsx file, and underneath, I guess actually above, we'll do that above here. We're going to do an image tag. All right, and then we're going to put the image in here, but the way we're going to do that is we're going to import it just like an object. We're going to import that into our JSX file. So we're going to say import SQL logo from, and then we're going to give it the path to that image. And we called it database .png. Okay. All right. And then we're going to come down here to our image tag, and we're going to do kind of something similar we just did. We're actually going to create we're going to set the source to that variable, or that, the thing we just installed or imported. src equal, and then we're going to go ahead and put SQL logo here. And then we're also going to have to give it a class name. So we'll say class name and get rid of that. And we're going to put in styles.icon. All right, there we go. All right, so we've got our little icon there. We've got our text. So it's coming together. All right, so now we have that. We're going to then start to create the rest of the form for this application. So we're going to, underneath our chat my database, actually let's make this an H3 too. It's not H1's kind of big, so we'll make it H3. And so under here, we're going to create a form element. Okay, and we're going to have inside of our form, we're going to have an input of type text. And we're going to give it a name of query description. Okay, and we'll give a placeholder of what question do you answer? All right. And then we're going to close out our form tag. All right, and we'll kind of come back. We're actually going to put a few more things in here, but we'll come back to this. And then we're actually going to add one more input. And we're going to make this type of submit. Okay, and the value for that's going to be generate answer. All right, and we'll go ahead and close that one out. Okay, and so let's look and see what it looks like. All right, there we go. So we've got the box here to start putting our text in there, and we've got a button here to generate answer, and we're not quite there yet. It's posting back to the server, which we don't want it to do. We're actually going to have React handle it. So we're going to have to add a few things here to make that work the way we need to. All right, so the first thing we have to do in order to support the submission and be able to send the request to the server, we have to handle the on submit. All right, so whenever someone hits the submit button, we want this to submit to our own local function and not go back to the server. And then we're also going to then go off and make our call to the server once we have written that part. Okay, which we're going to do after we're done doing the client. All right, but to get things started, let's go ahead in here, and we're going to create a couple. We're going to create a couple things here. We're going to go into our application, and we are going to import use state from React. All right, and then inside here we're going to create a couple constants, and one's going to be used to handle our query description. All right, and we'll say use state. And then we're going to do one more. And we're going to use state for that one. So the use state is obviously it's a React function, and this is how we handle storing state information on our pages, if you will. So we have to be able to provide a function to do that. And the way it works is when you call use state, it actually returns the value that you can that sets it. That's going to be something that's reactive that actually maintains the actual value, and a function to actually change it. So this is the variable that we're going to be using we're going to read from there to actually get whatever the current query's description value is. We're going to get that from that variable. And then if we ever want to change it, which we're going to do when we make our calls, that's what these functions are. So this is basically returning both of those so we can use those within our form. All right, now when someone hits this form, we want to have it do a submit, but locally. Okay, so we're going to have on our form, we're going to have an on submit here. Okay, and it's going to point at a function that we're going to create. Okay, so and anytime you see these curly braces, that's simply React. That's you're putting in JSX notation in there, or functions, or whatever the logic happens to be that you're trying to have. Essentially, that's a JavaScript, right? You can kind of put your JavaScript functions directly in there. That is the power of JSX. All right, so we're going to create a function, and we're going to reference that function there. And the whole purpose of the function is to be able to recognize when someone hits the submit button. We're going to capture that and be able to behave or act on it. So we're going to create another function here called onSubmit, and it's going to be asynchronous. All right, and it's going to be an arrow function. Okay. And the first thing we have to do is make sure that we prevent the server postback. So that's what ePrevent default does. It actually stops the postback from going to the server, because we don't want the server. There is no server to handle this. We're doing this all locally within our single page application here. And then we're going to do here is for right now, let's just go ahead and just log the query description. Okay. All right. And then we're going to then just leave the rest of this for right now. Let's just log it. We're going to come down here to our we're going to come back down here to our form, and we're going to put in onSubmit. So anytime onSubmit's called, or the button is pressed, it's going to call this function. It's going to block it from getting post back to the server, and it's just going to console log the query description that the user typed in, so their query question. And then what we have to do on our input is anytime the value changes, we need to have the onChange recognize that, and we're going to use an arrow function for that, and we're going to say set query description, and we're going to pass in the eTarget.value. Okay, so now we're simply setting this up so this text box, anytime someone types anything in there, it's going to save it as part of its state. So it's going to call that set query description, and it's going to save the state information, and then we can reach in and read it, which is what we're going to do here. So any change that's made, it's going to save it, and then we can immediately read it once someone hits the submit button. All right. Let's double check that this is working correctly. Let's go back over to our code here, and let's go ahead and open up the inspection, and let's go to the console, and let's clear out what's in there in case there's any errors. And I'm going to type in hello world, and let's see what it generates. There you go. So I see it's spitting out hello world here. So we have just about everything we can do right now in the client done until we actually implement the server. So the client application is ready to go, except for just a few more changes once we're done to actually make the call to the server, to make the request, and then to get back the response and put that on the page at the bottom, which we'll do after we're done with the server. So now that we're done with the client, we're ready to begin working on our server. And so the server is going to have a few technologies. Obviously, it's using Node, and we're going to be using Express and SQLite. And then so we have to set all this up. So let's go ahead and add in and start working on that part of the project. All right, so you could leave your server, your client running, that's fine. Just bring up a second terminal window. And when you're in here, you're going to want to cd into the server folder. All right, so we're going to collapse client down, and we're going to start filling out our server and setting that up. All right, so we're going to do an npm init. And you can go ahead and just select the defaults for all of this. Yep, there you go. And that will create a package.json file. So that essentially is the starting point to denote that this server, this folder is a node folder. So now in order to use our application or to write it, we're going to be utilizing a few packages. So we're going to have to use npm to install them. So we're going to use npm, we're going to install cores and .env, Express, OpenAI, and LangChain, and SQLite 3. All right, let's go ahead and install all of those. And we forgot to put the word install. And that may take a minute for that to go through and pull down all those packages. Okay, all right, all those packages were installed. So now that we have that, we can begin to fill in the rest of what we're going to need in the server. Actually start working on the server side. All right. First thing is we're going to want to create a .env file, and what this is going to be used for is it's going to be used to host and hold on to our environment variables. And so that's an easy way for us to be able to hold on to any kind of keys that we need. In our case, the only one we really need for this project is going to be our OpenAI key. So if you don't have an account, you'll definitely need to sign up for OpenAI access. So this is, again, not the free version. You will have to pay a little bit. It's not very expensive for testing, but you will need to set up an account, and you can actually put a budget of $5 or $10 a month, and you'll be fine to stay below that. For the stuff we're doing, it won't cost more than a few pennies. We're not going to be using an expensive model for what we're doing. But having said that, once you sign up, you're going to want to generate a key, and you're going to want to make sure that that key is safe, because if someone gets access to your key, obviously they're going to be utilizing your budget and you'll be paying for it. So definitely want to protect this, and that's one of the things we're going to do first. Is we're going to go ahead and copy this key here. Again, once you set up your key, you can't ever get back to it and see it anymore. So you can't ever change it, right? You won't ever see the key. So you have to make sure you copy it right away, copy to the clipboard. And what we're going to do is in our server, we're going to create a new file with a .env extension, just like you see there. And that's the reason we installed .env as one of the packages that we're going to use here. This is the convenient way of being able to have environment variables read in, so you don't have to store protected keys like this in files. And there's actually a way for us to exclude this so it doesn't get put into source control. All right, so we're going to have a single variable. So we're going to have a single variable in here, and it's going to hold our key that we got from OpenAI. All right, now that we have our OpenAI key ready to go, and we're ready to begin working on our server code. So we're going to come into our server folder, and we're going to select a new file here. And we're going to create a file called index.js. And this will be the main entry point for the server that we'll be using. So we're going to import a couple things. So we're going to be importing Express from Express. And we're going to be importing cores from cores. And then finally, we're going to be importing, actually, that's the only two imports we're going to have. So we're going to go ahead and create our application. So this just basically sets it up so that it knows that it's set up as an Express application. Express is just a framework that makes creating quick servers like this very, very easy to do. So that's all Express. It's just a framework that sits on top of just basic Node that makes creating servers easy to do. Then we're going to go ahead and do one more thing here to get set up, and that is we're going to use something called express.json, and that is going to automatically handle any requests that are coming from the server and parse them into JSON format for us, since we're going to be using JSON to communicate back and forth between our client and our server. This is just a convenient way of allowing us to not have to worry about all of the details. It's automatically going to parse it for us. And then lastly thing we have to set up here is another middleware that is CORS. So CORS stands for Cross-Origin Request Sharing. And it's a way to, if you don't have this and you have a client application, web client application that's talking to a server, if they don't live in the same domain or go back to the same domain, then it's kind of a safeguard to make sure you allow that traffic to kind of go outside of your main application to another server. Since we're going to be using two different endpoints, then we have to, and we're not all packaged together under one application, we need to set up CORS. So we're just going to set this up so that any request coming in from any origin will work. So regardless of where the request is originating, and then we'll set that up. And oops, put that in the wrong spot. Put this over here. So that simply means it's a wildcard that allows the request to, any request to come in. You know, sometimes helpers don't really help. All right, so that sets it up so our client can then talk to our server without having any kind of security issues. We're also going to set up a constant that's going to be our port number that we're going to use for this server. And we're going to set it up so that we can read it from an environment variable. If not, it'll be set to 3005. And it doesn't really matter what port number you use. Just make sure it's something other than it's above 1024, because anything below that is typically already in use. So you can pick any number you want for a port number. So this is simply going to check to see if there's a port in our environment variable. So for example, I could put a port number in here if I wanted to. I'm not going to do that, but you could put a port number in there. Otherwise, it's just going to default to 3005. All right, and I'm going to come down to the bottom here. 2 more things we're going to do, but now we're just going to say app.listen, and we're going to give it our port, and then we're going to give it our function that's going to get called back, and we'll say console.log, and we'll say server listening. And we're just going to put that in there. Okay. All right. Now our server is just about ready. So we're going to go ahead and put just one little test endpoint in here that we can test it out. All right. So we're going to add a app.get request. So any get request would come through here. And we're saying if anyone requests just a simple request to the server without any additional details, then we're going to return back hello world. All right. So now that we have that, we should be able to do npm start. I got an error. Let's see what I got here. Let's see what it is here. Maybe it's, hold on a second, maybe it's npm. Let's do it this way. There you go. Okay. All right. So this error, if you get this error, it's because there are different ways that you can utilize Node. So we are going to be using this as a module. So underneath version, we're going to say type and put in module. Okay, so this will allow us to use the newer syntax. Otherwise, you have to use the old require syntax to import statements. This all has to do with the import statements. If you don't have that module, then you can't use this syntax for importing. You have to use the old style equal require. Right? You have to use this format, right? So anyway, so in order to not have to use that one, you have to set that as a module. And there's probably a different way to do that. That was the same problem I had before. All right. Let's see what we got here. We got a port M. Got to get rid of that. Let's run again. All right. 3005 is in use. Interesting. Okay. So I must have this running somewhere else. That's okay. I'll try 3007. All right. So our server is listening on port 3007. So if we go over to a browser and type in HTTP localhost 3007, we should get back hello world. So if you got that far, then we now have a functioning server. It's ready for us to then begin to fill out so that when someone makes a request to query a database, that's going to come through our server, and we're going to then have an endpoint that listens for those requests. All right, so now that we're ready to go and start querying our database, we need to set up our SQLite database. And so as I mentioned, we are going to be using this data, in this database, I should say, and we're going to leverage an existing schema that already exists, including data. And there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can probably download the database itself, but I'm going to show you how to create this from scratch. So that if you wanted to, you can create your own local SQLite database. So just go in, and I'm going to provide this link again. Click on Chinook database, go to data sources, and we're going to come down and look for which one actually, it's the SQLite one. This one here, Chinook SQLite SQL. Click on that. Now it's a big script, it's a very large script, but go ahead and copy the raw data, copy that to the clipboard. All right, and then we're going to go back and we're actually going to go to our project here, and we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call this one Chinook SQLite SQL. Doesn't matter what you call it, just make sure you give it the name you recognize. Just paste in all that text in there. So that's all of the SQL scripts to generate SQLite database. All right, now that we have our SQL script here and we're ready to roll on that, let's go ahead and create a quick little script that we can use to actually create this from scratch, the actual database itself. All right, so go back into server and click in here, click in build underscore db.js. All right, and so this is going to be, we're going to import SQLite 3. Okay, and we're going to import file system, so we have to read from the file system. No, don't want that one. Sorry, get this out of here. Okay, from FS. So that's going to give us access to access the file system. And we're going to have a couple constants here. So we're going to point at our new script we just created. Okay, just verify that that name matches. All right, and then we're going to give it a database name. And we're going to call it Chinook.db. All right, and we're going to create a database object. And we're going to give it that database name. And then we're going to read in that SQL script into a variable. So fs file, fs dot. I know what I'm doing wrong. That should not have the curly braces around it since it's not default. All right. So we're going to do that. We're going to read file system sync and SQL path, and we're going to pass in UTF-8. All right, so that's going to read in that SQL file into a variable, and now what we're going to do is we're going to call db.exec. Okay, and that is going to take in the SQL script and a function. All right, so we're just going to check and see if we've got an error. If we've got an error, then we'll just handle it. Hopefully we won't get any errors. Okay, And then otherwise, we are going to just write out database created. All right. And then we have to make sure at the end here that we do a db close to close that connection. And actually that should happen, well, yeah, it's got to happen inside of here. Sorry, that should be over here. So let me copy this out of there, paste it in there. Okay. Let's see what we got here. And this also should be not using color braces. Okay. All right, so this is going to read that script, read the SQL file in there, create a database with the .db extension. We should hopefully see that in there if it works correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-C to kill our server, and I'm going to type in node build db.js. Database name is not a constructor. All right, let's see what I do wrong with that one. Oh, yeah, I know I did it wrong. This should be database. Okay. Let's run it again. And there you go. So we now have our database. So that'll be the database that we are querying when we want to ask questions. All right, now that we have our database ready to go, the next thing I want to do is I want to finish off the actual server and the client so that we can have the data come up to the server and then also be able to return back a response. And then the last thing we'll do is actually talk to OpenAI. All right, so we're going to make a few changes here. So when someone wants to make a request, they're going to press this, they're going to put some string in here and then ask for the generate an answer. We're going to post the whatever they put in here on the screen, post it back to our server using a new endpoint. And we're going to set up that endpoint so they can read the value. And we're going to capture the value that they typed in. We're going to put it in the request body, and then we're going to send that to the server. All right, so let's go ahead and work on the server first. So we're going to create a new endpoint, and the way we do that is we put another endpoint here, just like we did with the get above, except it's going to be a /generate. So that means anybody that posts to that endpoint /generate, localhost, port number, whatever it is, /generate, it's going to come into this function that we specify. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up, and we're going to set this function up so that it has the asynchronous call. And the way we're doing that, why we're doing that is because in general it's a good practice to use asynchronous functions whenever you're doing input-output. And since this call is going to reach out and make a call to OpenAI, it's just a general practice to use asynchronous calls here. So we're going to leverage that, and we're going to go ahead and put request and response parameters here, and that's where that's going to come in and out. And then we're going to go ahead and make it an arrow function. So anytime someone posts to this endpoint, this function is going to get called. It's going to pass in the request, all of the details about the request that happened, including the data that we're sending it, and then we're going to respond back using that function, parameter. Okay. All right, and so we're going to come in here. We're going to, for right now, we're simply just going to trick it and kind of put in just some dummy data. So we're going to, first off, have to go get the value that comes in from the request body, and we're going to put that in something called query description. All right, and we're going to get that from the request body. Okay, and so what this is doing here is destructuring fields from the request body. It's looking for a field in there called query description. If it finds it, it'll set that and pull that out. So it's just an easier way of being able to very easily go into an object and pull out its fields almost automatically, right, with a little effort. So that's called destructuring, and we're going to go and get that field if it exists. And then for right now, we're simply just going to log it, and we're going to just make sure we actually get something from our client when it gets called. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do that. And for right now, we're just going to leave it as it. Actually, there is one more thing. We need to respond back, and we're going to send back some JSON. And it's going to be simply we'll call it answer. And it's going to be the answer goes here. All right. So it's going to read the value from the body, log it so we can make sure we're capturing it correctly from the client. We're then just going to respond back with some simple JSON that has the answer and nothing else. And the answer is going to be hard coded. Later on, we're going to actually make a call to OpenAI to get the real values. But for now, we're just trying to kind of take it one step at a time. All right, that's it for the server. Let's go ahead and go back to our server. And I'm just going to go ahead and restart. So when you add a new endpoint, you might want to restart. Just so that it gets captured, because sometimes, even though it should refresh itself, I found that sometimes you might want to just go ahead and actually stop and restart the server, just so it picks up the changes. All right, that's it for the server. Let's go back over to our client, and we're going to have to put in logic here to make that request to our server. So we're going to create a new function, and we're going to call that function from within our submit button. So remember, this is the button that gets called, and right now we're simply just logging whatever it is the user entered. We're going to change that so that it actually gets sent to our server instead. So first off is we're going to go ahead and create a new function, and we're going to call it generate query. All right. Also make it async, and it's going to be an arrow function. It looks like that. All right, and then in here, we're going to make our call to our server. And we're going to await, and we're going to use a function called fetch. This is a built-in function that you don't have to do anything special to use out of the box, as part of just JavaScript and the newer version of JavaScript. It's there. It's one of the built-in libraries. You can also use a library like Axios if you want, but what we're doing, we're simply going to just keep it simple. All right, and here's where we are going to give it our endpoint. So our server is listening, localhost, and we are listening. If we go back here to the server, you can kind of see we're listening on port 3007. So we're going to put that up there, and then we're also going to give it our endpoint. Okay, that's how we're going to get back into our server at the correct location. All right. So then now what we're going to do is we're going to have to put in a few fields into this request. And so when you call fetch, you give it the endpoint, and then you give it the details of how you want it to be called. First thing is you're going to give it is the method. Okay, it's a post method, so we're going to use the post method because that's what we set up our server to expect. And then we're also going to give it some headers, and the headers just simply tell it the type of data to expect. Other things, you can have other things in headers, but the only thing we're going to provide is just the content type. And we're just going to simply tell the server that the body that you're getting has JSON in it. Okay, and let's see, and then we're going to go ahead, and that's the only header that we need. All right, that's all we need for that. And then the last thing we need to give it is the body. So here is where we're going to take our query description that we cut from the user, and we're going to send it to the server. So we're going to actually turn it into a string. That's what stringify does. And we are going to put it in a field called query description. That has to match this. That has to match what we said here, right? So that'll make sure that all gets pulled out correctly. If you misspell any of it, then obviously it's not going to work. So you're going to make sure you spell that correctly. And then we're going to give it our query description value that we are storing. Okay. And then we are going to handle that like that. All right. Last thing we have to do inside this function is we need to, once the request is fulfilled, we want to go get the data from it. So we're going to await response.json. And that simply is going to use the asynchronous method to wait for that call to come back, and then once it comes back, it'll then have the data object will have its value. And inside the data object, we are going to be using answer. That's what we called it. And we'll just return that. Okay. And if you want to, well, we'll leave it like this. Hopefully we won't have any errors, but you never know. Sometimes you have errors. It's the nature of Node.js, because it's interpreted, if you will, and it's not compiled. Sometimes you get some late errors that you might have to debug. So we'll capture those as we go. All right. Last but not least, the only thing we have left to do, well, actually have two things left to do. We're going to keep that logging statement in here, but we're now going to get the query out. So we're going to call our function generate query. All right, and that will wait for the query to come back, and then once we get that, this should have our string. So we need to then take that string, and I spelled that wrong. Let's spell that correctly. So set SQL query, and we're going to pass in our query. All right, so essentially we're taking whatever comes back from this request, and we're just going to store it in a variable, and then we're going to set it to our state variable, SQL query. All right. And then the very last thing is we need to have a place to put this so it can show up on the screen. So we are going to create a div here. Okay, and the div is going to be where the SQL query goes. We're going to put a class name here, and the class name is going to be one of our classes that we have in our CSS. And it's called query output. Okay, just confirm. Let's go back here and look. And yeah, there it is. So I have query output. Okay, so that's the style that we're going to be using to show that a certain way. So if we go back to our clients, and let's go back over to server. All right, looks good. So there is where the output's going to be. Now we want this to only show if after they've hit the generate answer and we've got something back. So we want this, if it's empty, we don't want it to show. So we're going to use a little conditional logic here that we can use, and we're going to go ahead and put curly braces around that, and then we're going to say SQL query and the way this works, it does conditional. So if this has a value, the rest of it will be, if it doesn't have a value, the rest of this gets ignored. So essentially it just will ignore anything after it. So that entire div logic doesn't get displayed. So it's just a little trick of using ternary operators to be able to support that. But if the query value has something, then it'll work. All right. Let's see. Let's go ahead and give it a shot. See if it works. I think I got everything. So I'm going to type in hello world and hit generate answer. And there you go. I got everything back. So there, it took the string, there's my answer. So the round trip happened, I got back the string that I was expecting. And if we go back and look at the server, we should see the output of hello world being spit there. Okay, so that's in a nutshell, pretty much, other than the OpenAI piece that we have to do next, we're just about there. So let's go ahead and work on the OpenAI piece now. Actually, before we begin on making any more changes, I do want to make sure that we actually have this checked into, or set it up so that we can eventually push this to a Git repository. So what you're going to want to do is go into one of your terminal windows and just make sure you're at the root. So you're at the root of the project with just two directories, client and server. And what we're going to do here is we're going to add in a couple things. We're going to add in, we're going to actually do a get init. All right, so that'll initialize it as a Git repository. And then we're going to want to go into our server. Our client already has it, so there already is a get ignore here, but we're going to want to do the same thing for our server. So let's go in here and create a new file, .get ignore, and you're just going to want to put some fields in here. I'm actually going to use one of the ones from GitHub, just one that's already set up that has all of the exceptions, so that we don't record and store things that we don't need to have. Okay, there you go. All right. So if everything's looking correctly, look, that's grayed out, and it's also not storing our .env file, right? We don't want these to go into version control. Obviously, this one has our OpenAI key. We don't want that. And then obviously this has a bunch of things that are not necessary to be stored. So that's your get ignore. And now that we have get initialized and a get ignore, we can do a get add all commit -m change. We'll say init changes. There you go. Okay. So that we have everything in version control. So I just kind of want to show you how to do that pretty quickly. Now, once you have this, you're free to use Git to store this to your own repo. All right, so we're going to go into our server, and we're going to create a new file. And this is where we're going to start putting in our OpenAI calls. So we're going to create a file called api.js. So a new file. Just make sure you're in the server folder. New file. Call it api.js. And here's where we're going to put in our calls for the API. And there's a couple things that I just realized we don't have installed. Let's go ahead and install them now. So we're going to need a couple additional packages here. So first off, let's go down to our server terminal window. Make sure you're in the server directory. All right, and we're gonna go in here, and we're going to do an npm install, and we're going to have to install LangChain OpenAI. Make sure I spelled it right. Okay, and that will give us the libraries that we need for OpenAI, and then we're going to have to install type ORM, which will help us with the database schema generation. So npm install type ORM. And we'll let that get installed, and then we should be good to go. We'll have all of our packages already set up that we need. All right, great. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and start working on the API for Node, for OpenAI. So we're going to go back into our file here, and we're going to do a couple imports. We're going to import .env, because that's how we're going to get our environment variables. All right, remember we're storing the OpenAI key in the environment variable, and we're going to get a couple things that we need from both LangChain as well as the data source for type, so we can actually get the schema out. So we'll say data source, and this is how we're going to generate the text that represents our database. Okay, and then we're going to need to import SQL database from LangChain / SQLDB. All right, so that's a special class for dealing with SQL databases as it relates to LangChain. And again, LangChain is just really just kind of a wrapper framework around OpenAI. And what's nice about it is that we can use it to go against OpenAI, or we can use it go against other types of large language models like Ollama or anything else that you can think of. There's a lot of I think there's over 700 different integrations with LangChain. So it's kind of nice having that abstraction layer there, that we can kind of create something that won't be tied into one specific large language model. So that's why we're using that. All right, so we're also going to get chat OpenAI, and we're getting that from that looks like that worked. Okay, and we need to get a couple imports from runnable pass-through. And so there's a lot of different things that LangChain provides us as far as being able to create chains. And these next couple imports are related to being able to build chains together, to be able to kind of chain requests together to pull a bunch of different queries into a single construction, if you will, so that because we're going to have to make a couple calls, right? We're not making just one single call to OpenAI. We're probably going to have to make 2 or 3 calls to pull this off. We're first going to have to ask it to, give us the SQL statement based on a schema, and then we're then going to say, okay, now that you have that schema, here's the question, and then give me the SQL statement that goes with it, and then we're actually going to make a third call that says, can turn this into a nice string at the end, so that it's something that's in English-like format as an answer. So those are calls we're making. We're going to kind of chain those all together. So LangChain gives us some libraries and support to be able to do that. And these classes like Runnable, though a couple of classes I'm showing you here are related to that. Runnable. Okay, and that's going to be from let's see, I wonder if I need to have one more. No, I think that's all I need. Okay, I'm just checking to make sure I don't need any other imports, and I don't. So I'm just going to do this here just to keep me from having to struggle with typing. No one likes to watch me type. All right, that looks good. And then we're going to have 2 more imports that we're going to get from LangChain, and they're going to deal with, first off, they're going to deal with getting a prompt template. Prompt templates just help us formulate prompts for OpenAI so that it has all the data together in a structured way. And then the last thing is a string output parser, which will allow us to take the output that comes back and make sure it gets formatted as a string. There are a number of different output parsers that LangChain provides, and string, there's one for JSON, there's a number of them out there. So it's just a way of being able to kind of chain together all of the specific things you need. You make your prompt, you make whatever request you need, you get back a result, and you format it into whatever it needs to be formatted so that the answer comes back the way you expect it to. And that's all that's going to do. All right, so those are all the imports that we're going to need. So first thing is we need to get our .env all set up, so this will read our environment variables. Okay, so the single environment variable that we have, so that will allow this to be read into our program, and then we're going to then get the API key, and we're going to create a variable here, OpenAI API key, and say process.env.openAI API key. So that has to match what you have in here. So the string here has to match what we're checking and reading that in. So that will give us that field. And then what we're going to do, and I'm just going to copy this from my my notes over here. We're actually going to just make sure that the key exists. So we're just going to put this logic in here, and then we're going to try to read it in, and if for some reason it can't find it, the process will exit. Okay, so that's all that's doing, is just kind of reading in that API key. All right, now we're going to need to hook LangChain back to our SQLite database. So we're going to have to create a database source that matches our database file. So our database file name is chinook.db. All right, so that has to match, and we're also giving it a type. So again, we're using this to be able to kind of connect the dots between SQLite, our database, telling it what type of database it is, and we're connecting that to use, we're eventually going to connect that to use our, actually it is coming from type-ORM, right? We're just simply just kind of giving it the details we need so that we can talk to that SQLite database. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and create a database object. So we're going to just connect basically to this database, and that will allow us to then be able to make queries against the database. That's all that's doing. We're just setting up our access to our test database. All right. And then we're going to create our prompt. All right, and I'm going to kind of show you what this looks like, and I'll talk to what this is doing. So this is the prompt template that we're going to send to OpenAI. This is one of them. We're actually going to send two of them. This one here is simply going to ask OpenAI to figure out a SQL query based on a schema. So we're going to call a function that will generate a schema off of a database, and that's going to give us essentially what the database looks like and all the table names and column names and anything it can get from the database. It's going to give us all those details. We're going to take that, we're going to pass that to OpenAI, and we're also going to pass our question that we're asking, that the user asking. And what we want to get out of this is the SQL query that's going to match that. Okay, so we're going to let OpenAI make that connection. It's going to look at the query, it's going to look at the schema, it's then going to look at the question the user asked and figure out a SQL statement that'll work for that. That's what this prompt template is doing. So we're just going to set that up so we have that available to us. We're going to use that later on. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create our model, or access our OpenAI model. So we're going to have a constant called model, and we're then going to say new chat OpenAI, and we don't really need to give it any values here. That you can pass in your own model, your API key, and some other things if you want, but we're going to use the defaults for this, and that should work. But if you wanted to, this is where you would specify your model if you wanted to do something other than GPT-4, I think, which is the default for this. Actually, I think it's 3.5 is the default. All right, now that we have that, let's just go ahead and just kind of run and just see if we get any errors here. Let's just see what happens here. So we'll say node API.js, node, not non-node, API.js. Okay, no errors. I think it worked. Otherwise, if it couldn't read something, we would have gotten some sort of error. So that looks good. So all of our imports work. and everything's installed correctly. So we are ready to roll with the next couple steps. And I'm going to just cut and paste this and explain it. The first thing we're doing here. The first thing we're doing is we're going to create a runnable sequence. This is from LangChain, and we're going to pass it. We're going to pass it the model, and this is where we're generating the schema. All right, so we're going to ask the database to get the table info, and then from there we're actually going to get back just a text string, large text that shows you all the columns and fields. All of that's going to be passed. We're going to then pass in the prompt, okay? And our prompt is the one we have up here. So we're going to pass in our prompt, and we're also going to put in the request here. This is kind of just telling us how we want when do we want the large language model to stop. So that's kind of a stop sequence to let us know that it's done. So that you can kind of put in there just an additional notes or context for the large language model to know what to do. And then finally, we're going to use a string output parser. So we're just simply going to generate a SQL query from this. So all of this is going to give us a SQL statement based on the question that's going to be asked, as well as the schema that it generates. All right, that's the first thing we're doing. Okay. Next thing is we're going to create our generate function that we're going to use from within our call later on. This is the endpoint's going to call this function. This is the function that's going to do everything and pull it all together. So what this does, it takes the query description, the question that the user asked. It's then going to create another prompt template, and it's going to then grab that grab that schema, grab the question, and it's going to then put in the SQL query, and then out of that's going to come from is going to be the response. Okay, so the way this works is a two-step process, because we're going to generate a SQL statement based on a schema. Then we're going to pass that a second time back to OpenAI a second time, along with the query that we ran. So we'll actually run the query, and which is what we're going to do down here. So we're actually going to run that query that it gives us. We're going to package all of that up, including the output of the query. We're going to send that back to OpenAI along with the original user's question. And what that's going to do is it's going to use generative AI to generate a nice string that's kind of nice, right? It's a nice string that we saw. We'll see that in the front end. So it's kind of, there's a two-step process that we're going to do. We pass it one time to get the query, the SQL statement based on the question. Then we pass it a second time to take all of that back and say, okay, given all this context, give me what the answer should be, or what the statement should be, or what should I give the user, if you will. That's going to be the response that's going to come back. Okay, so we'll pass all that, and we pass in the model, and then we pass in the final response prompt, which is what we're just building here, and then we're building all that together, and then we're going to invoke that chain, and we're going to pass in the question. So all of this up here is a chain that is chaining all of those things together. Okay, and then finally, we're going to wait for a response to come back. We're going to invoke the chain, okay, and then we're going to pass in our question. So this is how we pass the user's question to a variable called question, which again gets put in as the prompt, and then we wait for that to come back, okay, asynchronous call, and then we return that to the caller. Okay. So it's somewhat complicated, probably obviously the most complicated, but not terrible. It's a little bit of work to do, but it's not the end of the world as far as just complexity. This is probably, it take a little bit of getting used to. And actually, I'm going to show you what this looks like. We're going to use LangSmith in a second. I will show you, once we get this working, how we can monitor what exactly is going on between LangChain and OpenAI. Okay? All right, so there is everything we need on the client, on the server. And now the only thing left to do is to go back to our index.js, and then we need to invoke that call. So we need to, first off, we need to go ahead and import that in at the top here. All right, so we're going to import that generate function call from our API.js file. And then down here, we are going to, instead of just logging it and returning an answer, we're going to const SQL, we'll call it SQL query equal await generate, and we're going to pass in our query description. So we're passing in the question that these are asked. We're going to get back the query, and we're just simply going to take that and pass it back to the front end. Now we have to probably put a little bit of exception handling in here, so I'm going to put a little try block just in case there is an error, so that it doesn't actually cause the server to stop running. So we catch the error. Okay, and if there's an error, we're just going to log it. Okay, and then we're also going to send back just a message, just that we can just send it back. Actually, we're going to use probably the same field, and we'll just kind of pretend, and we'll say something like, great question. I seem to be having problem answering. Please ask again. Something like that. Anyway, so we're just going to kind of have a blanket block here that if there's an error, we're just going to give it the nice message back, and then we're just going to log it, then we can actually check and see what's going on. All right. Moment of truth. Let's see how this works. So we're going to go up here. I'm going to go back to my server, and let's make sure it's running. Okay, and let's go back to my client, and let's go ahead and vim run dev. Okay, let's see if that comes up. Great. All right. So let's see what happens. Let's go ahead now and let's ask it a question. How many days? There you go. There are 3,503 songs in the database. Give me a song by AC/DC. There you go. And so it's working as we expect it to. If we go look at the logs, let me see if I can grab those logs, see if I have anything on the server. Yeah, there it is. We have some things being logged out, so you can kind of see what's happening. Obviously, that's because I'm doing this right here. And I'm not logging the actual response, but not important for this. Everything seems to be working. Now, one final thing that I want to introduce you to is something called LangSmith. And what LangSmith does, it allows us to be able to monitor what's happening, what's actually being done on OpenAI. Like, what are the things that are going on? Like, what's going on? Like, what queries are being made? Not easy to see that. There are some ways we can do that using some callbacks and such, but LangSmith is a new capability that has been added. So if you go to LangChain and LangSmith, you can log in, and I'm going to kind of show you how this works. Now I already created a project. I'm going to create a new project here. And this is the kind of a dashboard. And what you can do is you can use it to kind of look at your application behavior and monitor it. So I'm going to create a new project here. And I'm going to call this one my chat app. Okay, and go ahead and submit that. All right, now there's no runs here, so what we have to do is we need to go ahead and configure LangChain or LangSmith to work with our database or with our application. So the way we're going to do that is by having 3 more environment variables. And actually it's 4 if you include the project name. So let me just show you what that looks like. And you can get all this from the documentation. So I'm just kind of trying to streamline what we're working on here. So we're going to go in here and we're going to come to the end here. And I'm going to go ahead and paste in additional environment variables. So by adding these into your project within the environment, we'll open it and that's automatically going to get read in by .env. So again, you're going to have to create an API key. It is free to do this. There is a pay version, but the free version allows you to have like 3,000 monitoring or requests each month, and so it's free pretty much unless you're doing a lot of work. Then maybe you have to pay a little bit for it. But so here I'm actually going to put my chat app as the name of my project. So I'm just going to get this out of here. Okay, and then as far as getting the key, you can get to that from their interface. And again, their documentation spells out how to do all this, but you can generate and create keys here just like you would need to for OpenAI. Same idea, right? All right, so I already have a key, and don't worry, I'm going to revoke this once I publish this video. So now that I have that, let me go ahead back in, and now you'll have to restart the server to pick up those environment variables. So just Control-C to stop it, and then go ahead and restart it, and then it'll read in all those environment variables when we call this function up here. When you call .config, it'll read all that in. All right, now that we have that, let's go back and let's try our application again. And I'm going to say, who are some of my customers? I just happen to know that that's one of the tables that are in there. And we'll let that go for a second. There you go. There's our customers. Some of your customers include blah, 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 blah. All right. So it's working as expected. Now what's cool is with LangSmith, you can go to your project and you can monitor the specific calls. So that one call that I made, that runnable sequence, which included both prompts, kind of showing you here what was actually sent. Okay, so remember I mentioned there were 2 different queries that were made as part of that chain. The first one was where we gave it, we asked it to generate a SQL query based on the question. Okay, and here is where we took the entire, all of this was generated when we asked the database for its schema, for its table info. We packaged all that up, and we also gave it the question, who are some of my customers, right? And from that, we would have received a SQL query, okay? And the output, and you can kind of see there is the output. That's the SQL query based on my question, looking at all of this data. That was the first go around. Then we went ahead and in our code, we took this query and we executed it against our database. Okay, and actually you can kind of see that here. we ran the query and got back a response. And that's where we sent, now we sent a second request. And the second request was this one. And you can kind of see that it's the same information. Okay, again, in context, so you want to send as much context as possible. That helps in terms of the engine being able to decide what to say. And then the very bottom here was the SQL query that we asked it to do, and here is the response. Okay, so there's all the data that it got back, and then the output of this was that message. That's what OpenAI sent back to me, and that's what we sent back to the client. So there you have it. That's how things work. That's how you can use LangSmith to monitor. You can use LangChain to build chains of multiple queries, and you have a full-featured chat app that will chat with a relational database that you can use and put in your portfolio. Hope you found this useful, and please like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching.